Welcome, friends new and old. My name is David Griscom, and you are watching The Jacobin Show, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and comrade and super producer, Matt Leck. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, David. Good to be with you.
I'm stoked to be with you again this week for episode 2 of The Jacobin Show. The first episode was a hell of a lot of fun, and we're going to be building off of that episode by episode. We got another exciting one. Typically, we are going to have one guest, but there's just been so much lately that we're going to do another 2 segments. We're going to be joined in a little bit by Robin Wonsley, who is an excellent city council member in Minneapolis, a DSA elected, and an independent socialist. She is going to be pushing for a Democratic Socialist caucus in the Minneapolis City Council. So really excited to hear her thoughts on why she's pursuing that and a bit about what's going on in that city. But first, we have some big news that kind of got overshadowed with the Zohran Mamdani win in New York, and that is that Dick Cheney has passed away. To talk about his legacy and what it means, we have Brendan James from the excellent Blowback podcast. But that's not all we're going to be talking about because Blowback has an excellent new season on Africa, particularly Southern Africa. We're going to be talking a little bit about South Africa, its role in colonialism, in supporting anti-communism, and its weird relationship with Israel, along with clips from Elon Musk's father. You're not going to want to miss it. It's a really excellent conversation. So if you're ready, Matt, let's jump right into it. Well, we got a really, really great one for you here on The Jacobin Show. I'm joined by Brendan James of the excellent Blowback podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're really excited about this new season of Blowback, and we'll get into that in a second. But, you know, we've been covering a lot the Zohran win in New York, and that's kind of overshadowed another big piece of news, which is the passing of Dick Cheney. And I want to kind of hear your thoughts on him, but I just want to kind of remind folks of how he viewed his role in the war on terror, and also the damage that he did to this country. This is him speaking at the AEI, American Enterprise Institute, of which I believe he became a board member of at some point. This is him in 2009, and him talking about how he thinks that he will be viewed in history.
For all the partisan anger that still lingers, our administration will stand up well in history, not despite our actions after 9/11, but because of them.
Well, Brendan, I don't think there's been a good national recounting of this, but in your opinion, will that administration, particularly Dick Cheney, hold up well in history?
Well, it's odd because, if anything, the sheen will be brighter on the side of the Democrats, at least in this current political moment. It's almost, I mean, part of the reason why my co-host Noah Cohen and I started our show Blowback was because back in the first Trump term, there was a rehabilitation project underway for not only Dick Cheney, but the wider projects of the Bush administration and other figures of the Bush administration, because while they trampled on international law or, the sense of just war or any kind of suitable response for climate change in a very important moment to have done anything equal to what most people consider necessary to combat that. It was viewed at the time as a disaster by most Democrats and even some Republicans, but because Trump flouted, sort of manners and some institutional, mores a bit more than the Bush administration did. The figures of the Bush administration became sort of recast as elder statesmen, Republicans from a time in which everyone treated each other with respect, and even though they disagreed and all that. And so Cheney and the administration he was defending there, in a strange way, I think has already begun to experience some kind of makeover, but from the center left and from the Democratic Party, whereas ironically enough, his own party was somewhat taken over by a different stripe of conservative, although I think that would have been easier to say even 2 years ago. Now we have as I'm sure you guys have covered, and especially on the day-to-day news coverage that you guys might take stock of, the America First versus MAGA, which is the new MAGA versus neocon, or MAGA versus establishment, because MAGA is now seen with some argument to be heard as too close to the old warmongering internationalist globalist version of the Republican Party that MAGA was supposed to stand against, with guys like Cheney, or against guys like Cheney. And Cheney was, by the kind of binary nature of the Trump era in the Democrat and Republican movements, or whatever, was therefore a resistance figure, however unlikely, because he said Trump is a grotesque, And so it's a strange moment to kind of assess what the official perception of Cheney is, And we saw Kamala Harris, I believe Barack Obama as well, issue quite, I mean, you could say they were neutral, but they were a lot less neutral and a lot more fawning than you would have expected even 10 or 15 years ago.
I mean, I think his rehabilitation has been, I think it's a kind of pining, I don't know, for a kind of respectability politics or whatever. But, I mean, I want to take us back a little bit to when this guy is in power, because it is crazy how much he has been kind of cleaned up, I think, particularly in like the liberal imagination. But I mean, this guy was like one of the most hated folks ever. And maybe to kind of paint the picture for folks, I think there's the kind of pop understanding that lets my former governor and our former president, W, off the hook, where, W was just like this fun-loving guy, didn't really know what was going on, and Dick Cheney just kind of dragged him into the Iraq War. Is that a fair way to look at it? I mean, he certainly plays a major role in it, but I don't think that W was kind of like dragged unwillingly into these disasters.
In our first season of Blowback about the Iraq War, we certainly take a couple pot shots at W for being, a dullard, more or less, certainly compared to the men and women surrounding him in the Bush administration. Although I will say those might have been cheaper shots than I would make now, because I don't think he certainly was not a terribly eloquent man, but I think he was actually a lot more on the ball and therefore more responsible than a mere patsy or whatever, was kind of perceived at the time. Cheney was, however, a uniquely powerful vice president and engineered that for himself in a way that I think does end up, earning him that reputation of the real president, basically. I think he was in control of most of the moving parts of the war on terror more than George W. Bush was, even if it's a little bit of a parody to say that Bush was, simply bamboozled into all of that. I don't think that's true either, but, it is striking to see Bush in the 2000 debates, in the election where he's squaring off against Al Gore, just a year before 9/11, saying, I think we need to stop being the ugly American. We can't go around the world telling people we do it this way, so should you. Now, you could say, well, 9/11 profoundly impacted his view of the world and therefore changed all that in an instant. But I think that was only part of the story. He needed a web of players, not just Cheney, but chiefly Cheney, Rumsfeld, and I would say probably Condoleezza Rice. Colin Powell was more of a company man who was going to go along with what everyone else decided without the backbone to resign or to resist in any meaningful way. And then you have the kind of details guys like Paul Wolfowitz, who, had Cheney and Rumsfeld's ear in a lot of ways, to be sure. And then you had guys who weren't so great on anything like Douglas Feith, but who were still important as the kind of, little minions that ran around and, whipped people in not only the American government, but also international players into shape. So Cheney was sort of at the top, even I would argue above Bush, of this sort of pyramid scheme style government, of just kind of trying to enforce lower and lower, players into what was ultimately a team effort and not just just Bush or just Cheney.
Well, let's start, I think, with who we should start with, which is like the people of Iraq, because again, I think that, as we're getting older. I mean, we're talking decades ago now, right? Which is sometimes shocking to wrap your head around, and we're still seeing the effects and the devastation. So before we get into like the American politics side and like how this, monstrous action, got underway, could you just kind of give people a sense about the devastation and chaos that this war caused? Because again, I think that there is this first draft that is kind of being absorbed by the public, is that like Iraq was a mistake, but it was a mistake because like we lost or like we didn't succeed, and I think that really lets off a very important moral and human rights argument fall by the wayside.
I think one thing that we try to emphasize in talk about feeling old, and all the way in our first season of Blowback, which is now 6 or 7 years ago, one thing we tried to emphasize in the first several episodes is the, before we even have boots on the ground in 2003, March 2003, the devastation wrought by American sanctions, well, UN enforced, but American-led sanctions on Iraq, which killed, at the very least, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands. The numbers went through some sort of controversy at certain moments, but it was a brutal policy that really did turn what was already going to be a tough recovery period after the Gulf War, not to mention the Iran-Iraq War, which we were very much a part of in the 80s. It was going to turn Iraq into a failed state, and it effectively did. It was really the brink of being a failed state already, with some actually pretty ingenious methods to keep things afloat by the Ba'ath Party, whatever else you can say about them. Up until 2003, when the view was they're soft enough of a target that we can make an example to Iran, who was on the list by key players in this administration and was really supposed to be the ultimate goal. But Iraq was this much, again, softer target from all those years of devastating sanctions. So just knowing how there was sewage treatment, medicines that they didn't have, just the state of infrastructure, all of that was already pretty devastated. And then you invade and blow a lot of the rest of it up, whether literally or figuratively in terms of the state and the state capacity to run things after. Then you get, of course, the story of, oh, we did a whoopsie and we started to, nation build in the wrong way. But I think that there was a goal to build Iraq back up on the model of a new, shiny capitalist lodestar of the Middle East. I think they wanted that to happen. Why wouldn't they want that to happen? So there was a certain amount of blunder in that didn't happen. But the destruction that came first was also intentional. That was not a mistake. And
was that because it was trying to send a message to other countries, or was it for? I mean, one thing that I noted, kind of watching a lot of Dick Cheney interviews before we were talking, was Dick Cheney kept on talking about television in a way that was so shocking. It's like, you could see the explosions in like our power on television. Like he very much saw a role for the spectacle of showing American might and military power.
And can I just,
yes.
Before you go on, Brendan, this was my political awakening. I had just gotten a TV in my bedroom, in the months before the shock and awe campaign. I remember watching that and feeling sort of like not what I expected. It wasn't like a disgust, like I wish I could say that. It was just like a sort of like a, what am I seeing on TV right now? So it was the time.
Yes, and I mean, whether it's the shock and awe campaign, which was both a spectacle and a military operation as well, obviously, but one that was designed by its moniker to captivate anyone watching. I mean, most devastatingly, the people who were on the other end of it, but also people at home. Almost to scare the people at home a little bit too. Like, this is what we will do at any given moment if we feel like it. And I'm sure some felt empowered by that, and were chomping the popcorn in a sense, because there was this bloodthirst after 9/11. But others, I think it was almost an intimidation and a message for people at home, going, this is what we want to do, and we're going to do it. You may not have even realized what you wanted us to do by going over to Iraq, but this is the reality. Rumsfeld, not to get off onto Rumsfeld instead of Cheney, but he's also departed, as recently, as has Colin Powell. It's really down to W and Condi at this point. Rumsfeld stood on at the podium at a press conference live while the footage was happening, and as CNN kind of had a split screen, he said, "What you're seeing is not happening in Iraq. It is happening, but it's only a slice of what's happening." And there was this I understand the point he was trying to make, but it's a pretty sort of sinister and ingenious point to make if you're trying to tell people that this is all kind of special effects. It's like they wanted to have it both ways. This is supposed to shock and awe you, but it's also, if it makes you feel squeamish, don't worry. A lot of this is just kind of what the media is focusing on. There's going to be a lot of flowering of democracy sometime soon. So don't get too hung up on all the explosions, And so to answer your question, David, about what was the purpose of destroying Iraq so thoroughly in the year zero is what I think Naomi Klein originally coined that, Baghdad Year Zero. We brought that along in our as an episode title for our show. I don't think it's that different from the idea of the Khmer Rouge restarting society in one fell swoop. I mean, you had not only the blood and guts, which everybody knows about, but also the Bush administration and their guys on the ground at the CPA, Coalition Provisional Authority, which was the effective government for the first year or so. They were allowing people to steal not only things from incalculable losses, cultural losses from the museums, but also trucks and state-owned vehicles and state-owned buildings, because they said this is privatization in action. That was one of the guys on the ground. His name escapes me after 7 years, but there was an embrace of this as you might call primitive accumulation that was just as radical a break from what had come before as what the Khmer Rouge did, because the numbers are fairly similar as well, as it turns out at the end of the Iraq War. So yeah, it was a message to other countries like this is how far we'll go, but it was also a statement of we are building the Middle East from the ground up, and you can just look at the unrecognizable state of this country to see how serious we are about that. And Cheney and his guys, such as Paul Bremer, who is his man on the ground, the viceroy so-called in Iraq, they were all on the same page about that. It had to be done.
I'm going to be mindful of time because I really want to make sure we get to South Africa. So I wanted to say a quick note on Dick Cheney. I mean, obviously this is somebody who dealt in death in one of the most explicit, disgusting ways possible. He's somebody who lied to the country. He's somebody who degraded a lot of parts of American democracy too. Let's be clear about that. You were noting the privatization, of our military, which is not just, capital getting more control. It's also giving a little bit of deniability for the government, right? A lot of things that they were creating were like, how can we get around international law and U.S. law? Obviously, also, we have this major domestic spying operation, which has been very, very well documented. So I just wanted to give you a chance on, on these multiple threads. I mean, for you, seeing this person pass and people talking about his legacy, I mean, how would you like people to remember somebody like Dick Cheney in the long term?
Well, to give him his credit, he was an incredibly effective manager and an incredibly effective manager of an empire that has sort of gotten its groove back. There was a Vietnam syndrome is what they called it in these days, that America was too afraid to use force and too afraid to act like the big dog that it is. There's a great book called Rise of the Vulcans by James Mann about the Bush war cabinet. Cheney, and I should also mention that people should look this guy up too, David Addington, who was his chief of staff and legal counsel, who actually was the one, people called him Cheney's Cheney. He was the one who was going around and by Colin Powell's off-the-record statements, was the one who led for NSA wiretapping. And of course, the architecture of the Iraq War, torture, enhanced interrogation. Cheney was the guy who legally, even more than Cheney, had his arms around legal concepts and power. He was the guy who sorted all that out. So, he was an incredibly effective, politician, leader, and should be studied and thought of and not underestimated or laughed off in the way that I think Bush is more easily laughed off. Maybe that's when Bush dies, we can come back and talk about Bush. But that should be, taken very seriously, because I think sometimes it's easy to go, as you said, even if you're trying to criticize the Iraq War, it's easy to say, oh, they just screwed up. No, it was actually a very, very well-oiled machine that in a large part succeeded in a lot of ways, and taking that seriously and taking Cheney seriously as a figure, I think, is kind of where I am these days, rather than just mocking or denigrating their personal character. I'm kind of fascinated to even at this stage still learn about how a man operates like that.
Yeah, I mean it is. It's a shame that he never got his comeuppance, to be fair. But I want to get to South Africa, because we have this clip, friend, and I really can't believe it. It is genuinely shocking. We're going to cut it into two. This is Elon Musk. This is Elon Musk's father, and he's going to talk about the U.S. here. And before we get into maybe some of the South Africa stuff, I just want you to kind of tell me your thoughts on like what this says about obviously Errol, but also Elon Musk, who's one of the most powerful people in this country.
The big concern at the moment, and why I think South Africa is a big talking point in the US right now, is America in the next 20 years will become, for the first time in its history, a minority white country.
Well, that will be a very, very bad thing to happen. You want to see the US go down? Why? Oh, you don't like cars and electric cars, and you don't like technology, or what is it? You want to go back to the jungle, or?
Okay.
I mean, Jesus Christ.
Subtle,
right?
subtle. He's making a subtle point there, but I think I picked up on it.
I mean, it is truly shocking, and it definitely paints, I think, some of Musk's demographic concerns in a different light. It is kind of weird that, by the way, I was saying to Matt when this video first came out, that out of all the places for Musk to move his operations to, he moved to Texas, where whites are no longer the majority.
No.
But I mean, what does something like this say to you about so much, about like the influence on somebody who now has a lot of power in our goddamn society?
Well, I know that there's a rather dodgy relationship between him and his son, right? I think, are they estranged? I know most of the children are estranged.
They're definitely estranged, and this guy's like a total monster.
Yeah.
But he's definitely bringing up his son with a certain kind of understanding of his place in the world, I would argue.
didn't realize he looked like late era Pacino as well. He looks like, I feel bad saying that because I still love Al Pacino, who doesn't, but he really does look like him in like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with that beard going there. But I mean, this guy, he could be estranged from Elon and all that, but he clearly, I mean, Elon's working through a lot all the time, especially these days. And I'm sure it's not hard to see the level at which he is dealing with a lot of, as we call it, psychology, with regard to his father and what he needs to prove to him and himself, and what kind of, whatever personal problems they have, what kind of inherited cultural and just kind of visceral bigotry that he carries with him, and thinks is one of the things his dad did not get wrong, and probably has leaned into more as he's unraveled, because it's hard to forget. Again, we keep talking about the passage of time. It's hard to forget, it wasn't so long ago that Elon was basically trying to be, much like J.D. Vance, accepted by the Hollywood libs and just wider society, because they wanted to be as J.D. Vance, another guy with a troubled childhood in a lot of ways, they wanted to be accepted. They wanted to be able to travel in the Republican circles, but also have the cocktail parties on the liberal side as well, and just be called a smart, ingenious little guy. And then politics sort of developed in a way that forced them into the hard right category. And I think they both, JD's struggling a little bit now, but I think Musk just decided to pull the ripcord and embrace a lot of the stuff his dad probably explicitly and not explicitly drilled into him.
Well, let's get into the cultural context here, Matt. Let's play the second clip, which is more explicitly about South Africa.
Do you really think the US is doomed if it goes under?
Yes, it goes under there.
Seriously?
Yes, of course. You see, if you take South Africa, we have a small white population that projects European culture, or what we learned from Europe.
And oppressed millions of black people.
No.
for decades.
How do you oppress? We gave them work. We fed them. They grew from a tiny little group into a massive group. That's not oppression. That's feeding them. Do you understand? You only grow big if you get fed. You only start at 800 and become 50 million if you get fed. We fed them, for crying out loud. Enough with this nonsense.
But so you understand, because the black population was so oppressed under apartheid.
Well, we never saw this oppression you're talking about.
You never saw it.
No, I never saw it.
Yeah, because you're white.
Good response there. But I want to, first of all, the sounds very familiar, by the way, to some of the things we hear about Gaza from Zionists. But two, I want to ask you first, Brendan, as somebody who spent a lot of time kind of thinking and looking at South Africa. Errol obviously is just a contemptible figure who is really willing to say a lot of things. But I wanted to ask you, is there anything about this as kind of a time capsule, or is this some guy who's just willing to say the quiet part out loud? Was this the kind of argument that we might have heard from, apologists for apartheid back in the day?
It kind of varies, honestly. Sometimes there was definitely apologism like this because, ultimately, much like Israel, as you say, or America during the Jim Crow era and earlier, of course, and outright slavery, you sort of deployed every argument you could for the audience you needed. And some people wanted to hear the picture, or rather hear a picture, wanted to see the picture of a benevolent white savior looking after the savages who they, really owed nothing to, but decided to help out anyway because it was philanthropic, I suppose. But then you also had a kind of brutal admission of apartheid's racial and almost eugenic quality. Not almost, of course. But when questioned by Americans, there was a Prime Minister, Vorster, threw it back in. I don't know if it was William F. Buckley, but he was being interviewed by some American interviewer, and he would just throw it back to the Americans going, you segregate. I mean, you still do, even after Jim Crow, and I'm not here haranguing you about that. So, whatever you're telling yourself about why it's okay to do here, that's probably, what we could say to you. And, it was at least a more open and honest accounting of a racist system than the kind you're hearing of there, where I bet he was saying maybe more something like that back when he felt he could. I'm talking about Errol now, more than now, where he has to pretend sort of the same way you hear the old Wehrmacht guys or Nazi guys say, hey, look, it was a war, we didn't always know what was going on, but it was either us or communism. So, why are you on our back about it? With Germany was, we thought we were doing good, and there was this imagination that there was not an open and proud racism and white supremacy at play, of course.
Yeah, I'll just also note that, obviously there was a whole slave ideology in the South where, slave masters, would say similar kind of things. Just truly disgusting. But those kind of habits die hard. But I want to talk a little bit about South Africa, and everybody should definitely listen to this new season. It is really good, friend.
Thank you.
But I want to look at South Africa with you just for a couple minutes because I think that a lot of people know Nelson Mandela and the kind of anti-apartheid struggle, or at least are familiar with it. But South Africa also plays a kind of an interesting role across the continent of Africa, and frankly, globally too, particularly in regards to Israel. So, could you just talk a little bit about this, South Africa's role in kind of maintaining colonialism, as well as a form of anti-communism during the Cold War? This ends up being a very important nation, right?
Absolutely. If people are not aware, although I'm sure you make them aware of it at the top of each episode, what Blowback season is out and what it's about, I'll tell them now just in case. It's about the civil war in Angola, in which South Africa, yes, plays a huge part. Essentially, the Portuguese, and this is all detailed in our season, so if this sounds interesting, go check it out at blowback.show. But the Portuguese were the original colonial power controlling Angola, as well as Mozambique and other territories. When in Guinea-Bissau, for example, when that collapsed in the early 70s, South Africa was already designing its idea of what a pliable Angolan government would be. They had a country in between them that was known as Namibia. It's now known as Namibia. At the time, it was called Southwest Africa, and it was essentially a South African colony. And they wanted Angola to be, if not that, a black majority government that was nevertheless friendly and ultimately collaborationist with white South Africa, as they wanted elsewhere in Southern Africa in general. You obviously also had Rhodesia as another country along the lines of South Africa that was coming to an end very swiftly. South Africa didn't want that. They also were anti-communist on principle, but viewed that as a very useful way to get the U.S. to back them in their colonial ambitions. So it really was this kind of like how Americans took over from France and Vietnam. South Africa wanted to take over from the Portuguese in Angola and Namibia and other countries as well. And they did that by appealing from a Cold War angle. But then, of course, elements of the American government just liked the idea of a white government being in charge because the government in Angola was a Marxist government, or it called itself one, and it seemed like black nationalism, or rather African nationalism in black majority countries, was more or less a socialist endeavor in most cases. So it fit really nicely for America and South Africa. You picked up also on the even wider international engagements they had. Israel was very, very involved, not only in defending South Africa at the UN and vice versa. Whenever apartheid came up for a vote, Israel would often abstain. And whenever the occupation of Palestinian territory came up for some kind of resolution or condemnation, South Africa would abstain. But also behind the scenes, Israeli generals played a big part in the invasion, the logistics of invading Angola. Which is the subject of our season. And then, of course, perhaps most notably, Israel and South Africa collaborated on the nuclear option that was always an open door for South Africa in the Indian Ocean. And there's some great reporting that we dug up and tried to give kind of some oxygen to from that period that is really about as I don't know, as much of a constellation as you could ask for between what many people have, I think, accepted as an apartheid state today and what was the originally, what was the original label of apartheid back then, collaborating on illegal nuclear capacity, as well as many other things like the colonization of Africa. So it's quite a rap sheet.
Yeah. And, I would just kind of note, bringing us to today, that in a lot of ways, apartheid South Africa was just a remnant of, old ideologies, that were still very much in power. And now their good friend Israel, still exists and is kind of practicing that. And that's why the voices of so many of the anti-apartheid freedom fighters has been so important, I think, in the Palestinian liberation struggle. I mean, Desmond Tutu, for example, coming out so clearly and saying what he said, I take him at his word, frankly.
Yasser Arafat was also a supporter of Nelson Mandela and the ANC. And, for all of Arafat's problems at the time, he was viewed as the legitimate head of the PLO. And Mandela would defend him against interlocutors in the U.S. who said, why would you ever, a man who we respect and support the cause of, why would you ever, be seen with these terrorists on the Palestinian side? And he recognized, at least what he had to say about it, was there was a common sense of struggle and they supported each other. Same with Cuba and same with other anti-colonial leaders at the time. So there was also a Palestinian, South African, ANC connection as well.
Well, Brendan, we've already taken too much of your time, and I really appreciate it. I did just want to give you the opportunity, one, to tell people where to find Blowback. And we did talk about a lot of kind of ghouls and unfortunate characters. So if there's anybody from this maybe recent season that you might want to highlight as a kind of interesting character for people to be excited to listen to and learn more about, so that we're not leaving everybody with just the doom and gloom of our enemies.
They're mostly ghouls, be honest. But, there's some really interesting ones. Jonas Savimbi is a fascinating character, a fascinating man. But I would say I'd be interested to point people to the leader of the MPLA, Agostinho Neto, who is not necessarily always mentioned in the same breath as Cabral or, Lumumba, but was a pretty important figure simply because of how important Angola became in not only decolonial movement and post-colonial movements in Africa, but the Cold War itself, because the biggest showdown Cold War-wise was probably Angola. There was lots of Cold War conflicts in Africa, but it had, these standing armies fighting, and Cuba, of course, sending, I think at a certain point, a total of 50,000 troops into Angola to defend against South Africa and Jonas Savimbi. So Agostinho Neto is a fascinating character as a leader. He was a poet, he was a doctor, very, very interesting guy, and we try to bring him a little bit to the fore in this season as someone who was maybe not on the radar of everybody who listened, but you can of course go listen to all of that at blowback.show. Hit the big button that says subscribe, and you'll get all of this season at once, ad-free, back catalog ad-free, as well as some goodies coming up that we'll be announcing in the near future. And we hope that you do.
Yeah, well, Brendan, I can't suggest people listen to Blowback in general enough, but especially this most recent season. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us on The Jacobin Show.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a blast.
We are thrilled to be joined on The Jacobin Show for the first time. Robin Wonsley, who is a city council member in the great city of Minneapolis. Congratulations on your recent re-election, Robin.
Thank you so much, David. I never doubted my team for a moment that we will win once again.
Well, I wanted to note one thing for people who are unfamiliar with you. One, you are a DSA member, DSA endorsed, but you also run as an independent socialist for office, right? Could you talk a little bit about that process and why that matters so much to you?
Yeah. So building independent political power here in Minneapolis has been a 10-year project. So I was the third independent socialist candidate that was run for city council specifically. But I think what was a really special opening was I ran following the wake of the uprising that took place after George Floyd's murder here by Minneapolis police. And there was really just this opening that I think all of us really believed in, that transformative change could be moved forward. Some of these bold, quote unquote, radical proposals around public safety, and also our political process could be advanced. And we felt this was a great opportunity to say the Democratic Party, or the establishment wing of the Democratic Party, has failed. We actually have a model here in Ward 2, because before me, my ward was held down by Cam Gordon, who was the most senior Green Party representative in the United States. So to show that we could have political representation that is grounded in the independent orientation, and to be grounded in like a grassroots advocacy approach. And really wanted to show that like working class people can drive forward change. You don't have to be affiliated to a party. And we can do this here in Minneapolis, starting right here in Ward 2. And we got thousands of people to support that vision. And I've been in ever since.
Well, I mean, what's been happening in Minneapolis over the past few years has been very, very exciting for certainly progressive politics, let's say, but I think more importantly and largely democratic socialist politics. And, you're kind of leading a push for something I think is a very interesting strategy, which is building a democratic socialist caucus on the Minneapolis City Council. Could you talk a little bit about, the plan here? What's the intention, and what are the strategic goals of operating in that way?
Yeah, so we're a little over just a week and a half out from the general election that happened here, where we did run a Democratic Socialist for mayor. We had 4 DSA endorsed candidates, including myself as an independent, also seek office at the council level. And we saw over 50,000 Minneapolis residents vote to elect a Democratic Socialist mayor. And all 4 DSA candidates did move forward in winning by large margins in their races, even though we weren't victorious with the mayoral race. And I think it's really posed this question because not only that, we saw Mamdani win in New York, and we saw dozens of other DSA endorsed candidates win across the country, and really showing that the democratic socialist vision, a vision around housing for all or a public safety system that goes beyond policing, or actually talking about minimum wage increases, these proposals continue to be widely popular amongst ordinary people. And it's so important to have that politics be cemented within our political process, like in local government. And in Minneapolis, with our current mayor who was reelected, this election cycle, we saw them run a red scare, an anti-socialist campaign to say we wanted to do everything, including burn the city down as socialists. And I think it's so important to make sure that we have to be clear what a socialist vision is, our priorities, or our opposition will continue to define it for us. And to also let working class people know some of the most successful initiatives, from sidewalk plowing to increasing minimum wages for Uber and Lyft drivers to banning rent algorithm fixed pricing technologies that large developers are using to price out renters, like those all came from the socialist elected leaders. So I'm excited for this caucus to be a venue for us to bring forward bold policy proposals through a formalized public process, a formalized legislative process, to hold town hall meetings with working class members in collaboration with our Twin Cities Democratic Socialists of America chapter, to talk about not only how we're strategizing around these policies, but how we're building a movement to see them across the finish line. And for us, that's looking like a $20 minimum wage, a city-owned grocery store, and housing for all. How do we actually build a movement across the city of Minneapolis and link with other cities to actually see these priorities that we know are widely popular? Like New York, people recognize groceries are high there too. They want to see a city-owned grocery store. How do we leverage this collective agreement for us needing local government to meet like massive food insecurity issues in our communities? How as socialists do we unite together and say our local governments, like, pressure them to show up in these moments and in these gaps? So I'm really excited for something that's completely brand new, but it's very clear is needed, and defining what is a socialist vision. Because I think there's lots of conversations about it, but as socialists, we're not really leading that conversation and narrative.
I think that's a really interesting point. So yeah, so there's one aspect of this that is very kind of public facing. So one, I mean, we can kind of have socialist victories be seen as that, right? But two, I mean, I reckon there's a level of coordination involved in this too, right? I mean, so could you talk about like this idea of building a voting block? And I will say, for people who are less familiar with Robin, one thing that I really respect about you as a politician is the fact that you are an unapologetic democratic socialist, but you're also somebody who is like very much involved in making sure that these city services and things like work for everybody, right? So like there are people you might have disagreements with, but you're able to work with them. This is really about honing this kind of democratic socialist bloc, right, in city council. So there's a public side, and then there's a strategic side. And if you could talk a little bit about the strategic side of it as well, in terms of how y'all are operating on the city council together.
Yeah. And again, right now there's 3 DSA endorsed council members, including myself. And, again, when we're talking about some of the most critical policies or funding measures that have been brought forward to address homelessness, to address housing inaffordability, to address, again, food insecurity, public safety issues, and going beyond traditional policing, it's all come from DSA electeds on our council. And in fact, our council is one of the most productive city councils in Minneapolis history. I myself have authored about 41 local bills in the 3.5 years that I've been here. And it's been in response to the, most basic issues around how do we make our streets more safer? And I'm talking about safer for pedestrians, for those who are using bikes or mobility devices, to secure millions of dollars for traffic calming measures, to winning one of the strongest rideshare policies in the country through the city, passing a policy to give Uber and Lyft drivers minimum wage compensations and strong worker protections. It's all come from the socialist bloc, driving forward these innovative, I wouldn't even say radical, again, like the idea that in 2025, where eggs are like $10, the idea that like 15 is still ridiculous as a per hour minimum wage. It's just like, what world are we living in? But those are the bold proposals that we have been driving forward and showing that we could be responsible or responsive for the everyday needs while also grappling with the failures of capitalism. The private market will never meet the needs for every resident needing to have food, or needing to have affordable housing, or for every community to have clean air. The private market has no incentive to actually fulfill those gaps. And we're here to say, no, logo government. Government as an institution that is supposed to be a proxy for the people should be showing up. And then the private market say, don't we welcome competition? Why is it so problematic if local government wants to develop housing? Isn't that welcome?
Yeah.
Why is it so problematic if government also wants to be part of the grocery store market and actually provide food for its residents? Why is that problematic? We're great to subsidize private entities, but when we actually say, no, we're going to have centralized ownership over those assets to meet the needs of people, then that's problematic. So I think it's really that opportunity for the socialist blocs to have those clear debates through a formalized legislative process, because what residents are hearing and is great or seeing, they see these services be delivered. But then we see the Fry-aligned or the conservative Democratic establishment who fight against all these measures like tooth and nail, then out of nowhere be like, and we did it!
Well, everyone loves a good example, you know?
We did it! Yeah, we're all team players. And then trying to figure out how to undercut, how to underfund those same measures like we're constantly seeing that. And then people are like, wait, what's happening here? Like, it creates confusion again, like for the public to say, why are you always fighting? Aren't you on the same team? Then you support that together? It's just like, let's make more clarity happen for residents to show that actually a democratic socialist vision, democratic socialist governance is actually a functioning approach. It's actually a credible approach. And neoliberals like a Jacob Fry or those who align with him, the chambers of commerce or who you will, do everything that they can, including developers, to say, no, this is not effective because this hurts our bottom line.
Well, I'll tell you, Robin, I'm very excited to see how this goes. I'll say I would love to see something like this on the congressional level and other, cities if they're able to follow suit. But how can, folks kind of keep up with you, your campaign work, and also if they're in the Minneapolis area, get involved?
Yeah, of course. Please follow us on social media. We're on all the channels and platforms, even the cool hip ones like TikTok. So if you look up Robin FOR MPLS or Robin for MPLS, either one of those are great to follow us on Instagram, RIP Twitter, or Elon Itter. I don't know what that is, or Blue Sky.
Most people are pretty confused still, yeah.
TikTok, like we're on all the platforms, and we're going to be detailing our work because we also, as you just highlighted, David, we want this to inspire other chapters, other elected officials across municipalities and different levels of governments at the federal level, even to also say, it's okay to organize very publicly as socialists, and to figure out how do we collectivize our power and visibility and political capital, so you will, in these political positions. And yeah, so please follow us on all those fronts. We'll have petitions. We'll have ways in which we're linking with other cities on how we're looking to advance those priorities forward, from a city-owned grocery store to a $20 minimum wage or renter protections like rent control.
Well, Robin Wonsley, Minneapolis City Council member, independent socialist, and DSA member, thank you so much for joining us on The Jacobin Show.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Matt.
Well, that was a lot of fun. It's always great hearing from Robin, isn't it?
Robin's awesome.
Yeah, Robin is great. And Brendan James was really wonderful having him on the program. I really can't recommend this new season, especially of Blowback, enough. And we got a lot of really exciting things coming in the next few weeks with The Jacobin Show. Thank you all for coming back, supporting us. Continue to spread the word. Like the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Subscribe to Jacobin. In fact, there's a pretty nice deal. You can find it in the show notes. You can get a special discount on Jacobin by using the show Jacobin Show 25 to get print issues of Jacobin for $10 or year-long digital access for $5. So use that code, get access to all that, support the work over here at Jacobin. We really appreciate all of y'all for tuning in. A hell of a lot more coming. Feeling great about this project, friends, and we'll be back very, very soon.